Welcome back. Today I was reviewing a script that most people would call a quiet story about a forgotten dinner reservation. They would be wrong. The real story is about a woman who understood that the most dangerous weapon is not rage, it is absence. The moment she stopped making plans, she started making moves. That distinction is everything. Welcome to Eternal Diary. The smell that Mara Chen associated most strongly with her 32nd birthday was not perfume or birthday cake or the white truffle risotto she had pre-ordered at Vaucluse 3 weeks in advance. It was the industrial cleaner the hostess used on the front desk, sharp and chemical and faintly citrus, the kind of smell that burns the back of your throat if you stand near it too long. She stood near it for 47 minutes. She had worn the gold dress, not a flashy gold, but not the kind that announces itself from across the room and demands applause. This was a deep amber gold silk that draped like liquid over her collarbones and caught light the way still water catches it, quietly, privately, only for the person close enough to notice. She had bought it 4 months earlier, on a Tuesday during her lunch break, after walking past a boutique window 3 times before finally going inside. It cost more than she told Daniel it cost. Well, she had never done that before in 6 years of marriage. She told herself it was a small rebellion, harmless and private. She had no idea then how much she would come to understand that particular impulse. The restaurant was on the 43rd floor of a building in Midtown that had been designed to make you feel like you were hovering just above the city's ambition without being consumed by it. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The tables were spaced far apart. The way tables only are in restaurants where the space itself is part of what you are paying for. There was a man at the bar who had been nursing the same whiskey since before Mara arrived. There was a couple near the window who were not speaking but were not unhappy, the kind of silence that belongs to people who have run out of things to perform for each other and found the result comfortable rather than hollow. She noticed these things because she had nothing else to do. She had checked her phone 14 times. She had asked the hostess once, with careful politeness, whether there was a note on her reservation. There was not. At the 47-minute mark, she called Daniel. He picked up on the 4th ring, which told her he had seen the call come in and considered not answering. She knew this because she knew him. 6 years teaches you the specific texture of someone's hesitation. Hey! His voice had a layer of noise behind it. A low roar, half music. Half conversation. She recognized the sound immediately. It was the bar at the Ritz-Carlton on Central Park South, 2 blocks from his office. They called it the bar room. He went there when the deals went well, and sometimes when they didn't. I thought you were at... Wait. She said nothing. The pause stretched. She heard him move somewhere quieter, heard the ambient noise compress as if he'd stepped into a corridor or around a corner. Mara, I forgot. 2 words, not 3. Not, I'm so sorry. Just the flat announcement of a fact he expected her to absorb and neutralize, the way she had neutralized most things. She had always been good at that, at taking the sharp edges off moments that could have been confrontations and rounding them down to something manageable. He had learned to rely on that. She understood now that she had taught him to rely on it. I'm coming right now, he said. 40 minutes, I can be there in... Don't, she said. She canceled the reservation, thanked the hostess by name, Isabel, it was on her name tag, and walked to the elevator. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection in the polished metal doors, the gold dress, the careful hair, the expression on her face that was not quite sadness and not quite anger, that occupied a space for which she had no word in English. She had read once that Portuguese had a word, saudade, for a longing for something you loved and lost. But that wasn't right either. This was something colder. This was the feeling of finally seeing something clearly that had always been slightly out of focus. She died 14 months later. Not dramatically, a blood clot, a hospital, a Tuesday afternoon in March that smelled like institutional cleaning products. Not citrus this time, but something sharper, almost aggressive. She was 33 years and 4 months old. She had, in the 14 months between her birthday dinner and her death, done the following things. Forgiven Daniel completely. Inai recommended him for a board seat at a company whose founders trusted her professional opinion, co-signed a loan agreement that used her grandfather's property as collateral without reading the subclauses carefully, and updated her will to reflect that the marriage was still the primary organizing principle of her financial life. She had also, in those 14 months, never once brought up the birthday dinner again. She woke up on the morning of her 31st birthday with the precise chemical memory of industrial citrus cleaner in the back of her throat. The brain does strange things with time when you have lived it twice. It is not like memory, which is soft and sequential and subject to revision. It is more like having a second skeleton underneath your first one. You move normally, you look the same on the outside, but there is something structural and rigid underneath that makes certain directions of movement feel impossible. Mara Chen, 31 years old for the second time, lay in the bed she shared with Daniel Whitmore and cataloged the room with the methodical attention of a forensic investigator. Their apartment was on the Upper East Side, 1,100 square feet. Leased not owned, a distinction she had never thought carefully about until she had spent 2 years in her previous life trying to understand why she had so little leverage after Daniel's company restructured, and he began, quietly and with considerable legal skill, to rearrange the financial architecture of their shared life. The lease was in both their names. The furniture was mostly purchased jointly. The artwork on the walls, 4 pieces, none of them cheap, had been bought at a gallery in Chelsea that was owned by a friend of Daniel's, which meant the paper trail on provenance was thin, and the valuation was whatever Daniel said it was. She had spent a significant portion of her second chance doing homework. In her first life, Mara had been a financial analyst at a mid-size asset management firm. She was good at her work, she was precise, she was patient, and she had a particular talent for reading patterns in data that other analysts missed because they were looking at the obvious signals instead of the peripheral ones. But she had never applied those skills to her own life with any rigor. She had trusted Daniel partly because he was charming, and partly because she had loved him, and partly because trusting someone is easier than auditing them. In the 2 years before her second 31st birthday, though while she was building the life she already knew she was going to be living, she had gone back to school. Not visibly. She didn't enroll in a program, didn't announce a career change, didn't do anything that would register on Daniel's radar as significant. She took 3 online courses through a continuing education platform associated with Columbia's law school: Corporate Law Fundamentals, Financial Forensics, A Practitioner's Guide, Estate Planning and Asset Protection, a course designed primarily for attorneys, but open to non-lawyers willing to sit through 3 times the reading. She studied these at night, when Daniel was at events, or working late, or sleeping, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier, and the particular quality of focus that belongs to people who understand that what they are learning is not academic. She was 31 again. She had 14 months before the blood clot. She had the specific knowledge of everything that was coming and the professional vocabulary to do something about it. She did not, when she opened her eyes that morning, feel anything recognizable as hatred toward the man sleeping beside her. Hatred was a fire, and fires require fuel and maintenance and cost energy she did not intend to waste. What she felt was something closer to the orientation a navigator has toward a coastline with known reefs. Clear, precise, useful. Daniel was 41, 6 years older than she was, and still physically compelling in the specific way of men who have always been looked at and know it without being obviously vain about it. Dark hair with threads of silver at the temples. He slept on his back, which she had once found endearing. He had an important meeting at 11 with the board of a company called Aurelian Capital, a private equity firm he had been cultivating for 2 years. She knew this because in her first life she had helped him prepare his talking points for that meeting. She would not be helping with that this time. She got up quietly, made coffee, not for him, just for herself, a distinction she maintained with care, and sat at the kitchen table with her phone. She opened an encrypted notes application she had installed the week before under the cover of switching her organization system. She reviewed the list she had been building for 6 weeks. It had 43 items. Some were questions, some were action points, some were the names and contact information of professionals she intended to engage in the coming months with the particular kind of discretion that doesn't advertise itself. The 3rd item on the list was, do not make any plans with him that involve your social capital, your professional network, or your grandfather's property. She sipped her coffee. Outside, the city was doing what it always did at 7 in the morning in late October, producing that specific gray-gold light that looks like the sky is deciding whether to commit to the day. She had always loved autumn mornings in New York. That, at least, was unchanged. The birthday was in 3 weeks. She knew exactly what was going to happen. He would forget the reservation, not maliciously, not with intent, but with the particular variety of negligence that is in some ways worse than malice because it cannot be argued with. Malice implies you matter enough to be targeted. Negligence implies you are part of the furniture of someone's life, something they move around without thinking about. She had spent 6 years being part of the furniture. She had another 14 months of it ahead, technically. But the furniture was no longer passive. She had a meeting of her own that morning at 9 in a coffee shop on Lexington Avenue that she had chosen because it was 3 blocks from a building where a woman named Caroline Voss maintained a small but respected private practice in estate planning and asset protection law. She had found Caroline through a research trail that had taken her 3 weeks and started with a law review article on inherited property and spousal rights that Caroline had written in 2019. The article was dense, technical, and deeply unfashionable in its refusal to make its subject accessible. Mara had read it 4 times. She showered, dressed in clothes that communicated competence without performance, dark trousers, a gray cashmere sweater, good shoes that cost money but not obviously, and left the apartment without waking Daniel. He texted her at 9:43. "Where did you go?" She read the message in the coffee shop while Caroline Voss was reviewing the notes Mara had prepared. 3 pages of typed summary outlining her grandfather's property, the loan agreement she had not yet signed in this life, and the specific clauses she needed to understand before any conversation about collateral could take place. She put her phone face down on the table. She had nothing to say to Daniel at 9:43 on a Tuesday morning, and more specifically, she had learned something in her previous life that she intended to apply rigorously in this one. Every response you give to someone is a tiny vote for the idea that a response is required. She was going to stop voting. Caroline looked up from the pages. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of watchful, slightly skeptical attention that good lawyers develop as a professional habit, and then cannot turn off in any context. "This loan agreement," she said. "Well, you haven't signed it yet?" "No." "Who prepared it?" "Daniel's attorney. His name is—" "I know who prepared it," Caroline said, with the flat economy of someone who has been in a city long enough to have intersected with everyone. "I've seen his work before. The subclause on default conditions in property-backed personal loans is his signature. It looks like a standard clause until you map it against the primary guarantee structure, at which point it becomes something significantly different." She set the pages down. "If you sign this and any default condition is triggered, not even a full default, a technical default, the kind that can be engineered with creative accounting, the property transfer mechanism in subclause 14C activates automatically. No court required. 90 days, Mara said. "I know." Caroline studied her for a moment. "You know because you've been doing your homework. Or you know because this has happened before." It was a precise question, the kind that a person asks when they have noticed something in your effect that does not match the ordinary profile of a client seeking advice for the first time. Mara looked at her steadily. "Both," she said. Caroline's expression did not change. She was the kind of person who had heard enough strange things in professional confidence that she had long since stopped registering them as strange. She picked up her pen. "All right, let me show you what not signing looks like. And then let me show you what a counter structure looks like if you want to protect the property without cutting off the relationship entirely. At least on paper." "I want to cut off the relationship," Mara said. "I just don't want to look like I am." The pen paused. Caroline looked at her again with that precise, evaluative attention. "That," she said, "is a more sophisticated goal. It takes longer to build, and it requires that you are very good at appearing to behave normally." "I've had practice," Mara said. She ordered another coffee. The one she had been drinking had gone cold. The thing about living your life twice is that you stop being afraid of the small confrontations, the minor social frictions, the low-grade discomforts that most people spend enormous reserves of energy trying to avoid. You have already lived through the consequences of avoiding them. You have the scar tissue. You also have the knowledge that the consequences of the alternative, of not avoiding them, of simply being coldly, precisely honest about what you want and what you are doing, are not nearly as catastrophic as you spent your first life believing. Mara had in her first life been excellent at managing other people's comfort at the expense of her own clarity. She was attentive and warm and skilled at reading rooms. Yet knowing when to push and when to soften and when to simply absorb a thing so that the social fabric stayed intact. These were genuinely good qualities. They had also made her, in certain specific contexts, very easy to take advantage of. The birthday dinner reservation was at Vaucluse, as it had been the first time. She had made it 3 weeks in advance, as she had the first time, because the restaurant required advance booking, and because she had always, all her adult life, she'd treated her own birthday as an occasion worth planning for. She had not mentioned it to Daniel once it was made. She had not reminded him. She had not sent him a calendar invite, which she had done the first time, diligently, 2 weeks and then 1 week before. She had done none of the labor of ensuring that the occasion existed in his consciousness. This was not an oversight. This was a protocol. She was conducting what she had come to think of as a documentation project, which was the clean technical term she preferred over the emotional alternatives. Every time Daniel failed to track something that she had chosen not to track for him, she noted it, the date, the context, the nature of the failure, and the specific thing she had been providing in her previous life that had masked it. She was building a record. Not for a lawyer, not yet. This was not legal strategy, not at this stage. It was personal forensics. She was mapping the exact shape of a pattern she had always felt but never quantified. At 7 on the evening of her birthday, she dressed in the gold dress again. The same dress, the same amber gold silk, the same quiet private way it caught the light. She had kept it in the back of the closet where Daniel never looked, still in the garment bag from the boutique, untouched and waiting. Wearing it felt like reusing a crime scene. She felt no sentimentality about this. The dress was beautiful, and she had paid for it, and she intended to wear it properly this time, in the specific sense of wearing it to a dinner she would actually attend. She went to Vaucluse alone. She sat at the table for 2 and ordered the white truffle risotto she had pre-ordered the first time and never tasted. She ordered a glass of Burgundy. She had learned enough about wine in the interim years to order specifically a Chambol Moussigny from a producer she had researched and looked forward to trying. She ate slowly. She was unhurried. The couple 2 tables away were on what appeared to be a first date, the specific calibration of attention and self-presentation that first dates produce. She found it quietly affecting, not in a nostalgic way, but in the way that watching something function correctly is affecting when you have spent a long time in the company of something that doesn't. At 8:47, Daniel called. She let it go to voicemail. He called again at 9:12. She was finishing her dessert, a thin almond tart with honey ice cream that tasted exactly as precise and considered as it looked. She let it go to voicemail again. He texted at 9:20. "I'm sorry, I forgot. I know that's not enough. Please call me." She read the text, set her phone face down on the tablecloth, and finished her dessert. Then she paid the bill. Then she stood, put on her coat, thanked the server by name, and walked to the elevator. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection in the polished metal doors. The gold dress, the careful hair, the expression on her face that was different this time, not the unnamed cold sadness of the first time, but something that was almost its opposite, something that had temperature and direction. She looked like a person who had somewhere to be. She did not call Daniel back that night. She came home at 11, and he was sitting in the living room with the particular posture of a man who has been waiting in discomfort for hours and is attempting to project that discomfort onto the person entering the room through the angle of his shoulders and the quality of his silence. She had seen this posture before. In her previous life, she would have rushed to soften it, would have met his discomfort halfway, taken a portion of it on herself as a kind of emotional transaction designed to restore equilibrium. She walked past him to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water. She came back to the living room doorway. "I'm gonna sleep," she said. He said, "We need to talk about this." She said, "Okay, not tonight." She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to him move through the apartment for 40 minutes before he came to bed. He lay on his side, facing away from her. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and felt the particular quality of clarity that is hard to describe to someone who has never had it. The clarity of a person who is no longer confused about where they stand or what they are doing. It was not comfortable. It was something better than comfortable. It was accurate. The pivot point of the story was not the birthday dinner, though the birthday dinner was the key that unlocked the understanding. The pivot point was a company called Meridian Asset Holdings, which did not yet exist on the morning of Mara's second 31st birthday, but which would exist, she knew, in 8 months, incorporated in Delaware, with a registered agent address in Wilmington and a capital structure that looked, at first examination, like a standard real estate holding vehicle, and was at second examination something considerably more interesting. She knew it would exist because she had spent 18 months in her first life trying to understand why her grandfather's property, a 12-acre parcel in Westchester that her grandfather had left to her specifically and explicitly in a will that had been drafted with considerable care, had ended up in a legal dispute with an entity she had never heard of. A dispute that was resolved in that entity's favor through a settlement negotiated by Daniel's attorney while she was in the hospital in the week before she died. She had not known about the settlement until afterward. She had been, in the most literal sense, in no position to object. The property dispute had appeared, on the surface, to be connected to the loan agreement, the one she had not signed in this life, the one with the subclause that Caroline Voss had flagged. But it wasn't only the loan agreement. The loan agreement was one instrument in a larger structure, and the larger structure required understanding several things simultaneously. How Delaware holding companies could be used to obscure beneficial ownership, how personal property could be encumbered through instruments that didn't require the owner's direct signature under certain specific conditions, and how a financial forensics analysis of transaction patterns could reveal, in retrospect, the sequence of decisions that had built the structure. Financial forensics is a discipline that most people associate with fraud investigations, corporate scandals, insurance claims, criminal cases. What they don't know is that its methodologies are entirely applicable to private financial disputes, to the kind of quiet rearrangement of assets that happens in marriages and partnerships and closely held business relationships, where one party is paying attention and the other isn't. The methodology is the same. You identify the transaction pattern, you trace the flow of value, you map the timing against the relationships and the incentives, and you build a picture of intent from the shape of behavior rather than the content of statements. Mara had taken the financial forensics course because she wanted to be able to do this herself, not to hire someone to do it, not yet, but to be able to read the map, to know what she was looking at. What she was looking at? Reconstructed from memory and from 3 months of careful research in her second life was this. Daniel Whitmore had, over the course of their marriage, been building a parallel financial architecture. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself or triggered any of the ordinary alarms that a financially literate person would recognize. In increments. A company here, a financial instrument there, a relationship with an attorney whose conflict of interest disclosure was technically complete and practically meaningless. He was, she had come to understand, not a good husband. He was, however, a very good architect of plausible deniability. The question was not whether she could prove this. The question was whether she needed to prove it. And the answer she had arrived at after considerable thought was, not in the way you might think. At her firm, Mara was senior analyst on 3 accounts. Well, one of them was a real estate investment trust with holdings concentrated in the Northeast Corridor. This was not accidental. She had requested that account specifically, and she had used the 4 months since her second birthday to make herself indispensable on it by producing an analysis of a portfolio segment that had been underperforming in ways that no one had adequately explained. Her explanation was both technically sound and practically actionable. Her managing director had called it one of the better pieces of analytical work the team had produced in 2 years. She had been careful not to look pleased by this, because she was not doing good work for the praise. She was doing good work because good work produced a specific kind of professional capital. And professional capital was one of the things she intended to spend very carefully over the next 10 months. She had also, quietly, begun to establish a relationship with a financial forensics consulting firm, not as a client, as a potential referral source. She had introduced herself at an industry event in November as a financial analyst with a client base that occasionally encountered situations requiring forensics expertise, and she had been precise and credible in this framing, which had the advantage of being entirely accurate. The principal of the firm, a woman named Grace Tan, who had spent 12 years as a forensic accountant at a Big Four before starting her own practice, had given her a card and said, without elaborating, that referrals of the right kind were always welcome. The right kind. Mara had understood exactly what that meant. She and Daniel had dinner together twice a week, on average, in the period between her birthday and Thanksgiving. She was cordial, she was attentive, in the specific, calibrated sense of someone who is present without being available. She asked questions about his work with the genuine curiosity of a person who understands the business landscape and finds the subject interesting independent of the relationship, because she did. She did not, under any circumstances, share information about her own work at a level of detail that would allow him to connect her professional activities to the shape of what she was building. This required more discipline than it sounds. She had spent 6 years being forthcoming with him about her work, her thinking, her strategies, because she had believed, as people who love someone tend to believe, that sharing was the natural currency of intimacy. She had learned, with considerable specificity, what that currency had purchased. She did not mention the birthday dinner. Not once, not obliquely, not in the mode of forgiveness that implies the offense is being carried. She simply did not mention it. This was harder for him than it would have been if she had brought it up, and they had had the conversation he was clearly primed for. The apology, the acknowledgement, the processed and filed resolution that would allow both parties to return to their established positions. She did not give him the conversation. She ate her dinner and talked about the election results and asked him how the Aurelian meeting had gone, which it had gone well, and poured wine and was, to all visible appearances, fine. He brought it up himself in mid-November, while they were cleaning up after a Sunday dinner she had cooked because she was good at it, and because cooking at home required fewer revelations than restaurants. He said, with the specific combination of contrition and challenge that she had come to recognize as his mode of operating when he felt disadvantaged, "You're never going to say it, are you?" She said, "Say what? That you're still angry about your birthday?" She turned off the tap and dried her hands on the kitchen towel. She turned and looked at him with the direct, neutral attention of someone who is not performing neutrality, but simply experiencing it. "I'm not angry," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something she was not providing. "Then what are you?" "I made a reservation," she said. "You didn't come. I went alone and had a very good dinner." That's what happened. There's nothing else to say about it. The silence that followed had texture. He was not used to this. He was used to her emotional range being something he could work with, orient toward, respond to. The specific flatness she was offering him now was not coldness, which would have been something he could push against. It was simply the absence of a handle. She had removed the handle. He said, "You're different." She said, "I'm going to finish up here." "You should start on that filing you mentioned this morning." She turned back to the sink and heard him leave the kitchen, and she stood there for a moment with both hands on the edge of the counter and looked at the window above the sink, which reflected back the kitchen light against the dark outside. Her face, in that reflection, was the face of someone who is exactly where she intends to be. The Meridian Asset Holdings Incorporation happened in March, as she had known it would. 8 months after her birthday. She found it because she was looking, because she knew where to look, and because she had spent those 8 months building both her expertise and her access to the right databases. She found the Delaware filing, the registered agent, the broad language of the stated purpose. She found the 2 other entities that fed into it, both incorporated in the same window of time, both with thin and careful documentation. She called Grace Tan on a Wednesday morning in late March from a park bench on the east side of Central Park, which she had chosen because there was no chance of running into anyone from her office or her personal life, and because the ambient noise of the park provided a kind of acoustic privacy that indoor spaces don't. She had thought carefully about this call, about what to say and what not to say, about how to describe what she had found without disclosing more than was necessary at this stage. Grace answered on the second ring. "I found a holding structure," Mara said. 3 entities, Delaware, incorporated in sequence over 6 weeks. The stated purpose on each one is broad enough to cover virtually anything. I can trace the capital origins on 2 of them. The third one I can get to, but I need either subpoena power or the right third-party relationship." A pause, then Grace said, "So what's your relationship to the beneficial owner?" "Spousal." Another pause, longer. "Is this a divorce situation?" "It will be," Mara said, "but not yet. I need to understand the full structure before I initiate anything, because once I initiate, the structure changes. He's good enough to make it change quickly. How did you find the entities? Pattern analysis on transaction timing combined with beneficial ownership disclosure research through the FinCEN database. I cross-referenced against public UCC filings in New York and Delaware. The pause this time had a different quality. You did this yourself? Yes. You're a financial analyst. I've been doing continuing education. Clearly, Grace's tone had shifted from professional neutral to something more engaged, the tone of someone who recognizes competence and finds it interesting. This is a sophisticated approach. Most clients come to me with suspicions and anecdotes. So you're coming with a partial map. I need the rest of the map, Mara said, and I need to know specifically whether any of these entities have been used to encumber my separate property. I have inherited real property that I've been protecting contractually, but I want to know if there are instruments I haven't found yet. Your separate property, Grace repeated. Inherited pre-marriage? Pre-marriage clearly designated in the will. Not commingled at any point that I can document. Okay, Grace sounded like she was writing. I'm going to need you to come in. This is not a phone conversation. I know, Mara said. I can come Thursday. She sat on the bench for a few minutes after she hung up, watching a man throw a ball for a dog with the focused, generous patience that some people reserve for animals. The dog was a retriever of some kind, young, not yet fully coordinated, to throwing itself at the ball with an enthusiasm that outpaced its agility. She felt something she had not expected to feel in this moment, which was a kind of affection for the world, specific and uncomplicated. The morning was cold, and the park had that late March quality of being on the edge of something. Not fully winter, but not yet spring. The trees still bare, but with a suggestion of green at the branches that might be real or might be the light doing something optimistic. She had 12 months before the blood clot. She was going to be very busy. Here is what financial forensics actually does in practical terms when it is applied to the kind of situation Mara was building her case around. It does not look for proof of a crime necessarily. It looks for anomalies, places where the documented financial behavior diverges from what the stated facts would predict. A holding company incorporated in Delaware with a capital contribution that exceeds the documented income of the contributing party by a factor of 3 is an anomaly. A sequence of UCC financing statements filed against an individual's assets in a pattern that suggests pre-planned collateral positioning is an anomaly. A transaction between a closely held entity and a third-party service provider where the service provider's own ownership structure traces back to a related party is an anomaly. None of these anomalies are illegal, individually. That is the sophistication of this kind of architecture. Each individual element is defensible, technically compliant, explainable. What makes it meaningful is the pattern. The fact that when you plot all the anomalies together and look at their timing and direction, they are not random. They are telling a story. The story may or may not be actionable in a court of law, depending on jurisdiction and evidence quality. But that is not the primary use of the story. The primary use of the story is leverage. Grace Tan's office was in a building on Park Avenue that managed the particular trick of being both prestigious and anonymous, the kind of building you could walk past 100 times and not register specifically, which was presumably part of the appeal for certain clients. The office itself was clean and spare, with none of the theatrical warmth that some professionals deploy to put clients at ease. Or there was good art on one wall, 2 pieces, both abstract, both clearly chosen for quality rather than accessibility. Mara liked this about the space. It suggested someone whose priority was accuracy rather than comfort. Grace was reviewing the documentation Mara had brought, printed, not electronic on paper she would shred after the meeting, when she said without looking up, "You understand that spousal rights in New York mean that even if these entities were established using marital funds, proving improper diversion is a different standard than proving the diversion." I know, Mara said. I'm not building a case for improper diversion. Grace looked up. Then what are you building? A case for equitable distribution that accounts for the full economic picture, including the value that these entities represent, which doesn't currently appear anywhere in the marital balance sheet because he hasn't disclosed them. He will, in discovery. Some of them, Mara said. The third entity, Meridian, has a layered structure that makes discovery complicated. There's a foreign intermediary in the chain. She paused. I know this because in She stopped, chose different words. I've done research on the structure. Grace was quiet for a moment. You've done research on a structure that includes a foreign intermediary without having formal discovery authority. I've done public records research and made some inferences that I believe are well-founded. Those inferences, Grace said carefully, need to become documented findings before they're usable, and the documentation needs to happen through proper channels. She set down her pen. There's a forensic accounting methodology for analyzing closely held entities in divorce proceedings. It's standard practice in high-asset cases. What I can tell you is that if your preliminary map is accurate, and if the structure is what you think it is, then the equitable distribution analysis is going to produce a very different number than whatever he's planning to offer. I know, Mara said. That's the point. When are you planning to initiate the divorce? Mara looked at her evenly. I'm not going to initiate it. He is. The silence in the room was of a specific quality. Grace looked at her without expression. Then she said very carefully, That's a longer game. Yes, Mara said, and the timing matters. There are conditions under which the equitable distribution analysis is more favorable to me. Specifically, there's a period, I believe it's approximately 6 months from now, when the meridian structure will have generated enough documented activity to demonstrate its capitalization clearly. But before he takes the first step toward a legitimate wind down that would change the valuation basis. How do you know there's going to be a wind down? Mara held Grace's gaze without answering. Grace looked at her for a long moment. She was very good at her job. Oh, which meant she was very good at reading what was not being said, and what was not being said in this room was something she had clearly decided as a professional matter, not to ask about directly. She picked up her pen. All right, she said, let me tell you what the 6-month preparation looks like. The spring was the most difficult period in the specific sense of requiring the most sustained discipline. Not emotionally. She had managed the emotional dimension more effectively than she had expected, which she attributed to the particular clarity of purpose that comes with having a project. Practically. The difficulty was maintaining the surface texture of the marriage with sufficient consistency that Daniel noticed nothing strategic while simultaneously building in parallel the documentation and professional relationships and financial preparations that the plan required. She had an attorney. She had a forensic accountant. She had a financial advisor who was not connected to any of the accounts she shared with Daniel. She had quietly, over the course of 4 months, separated her direct deposit income into a personal account she had opened at a bank where she had no existing relationship and where Daniel had no accounts of any kind. She had done this incrementally, which was both legally clean, her income was her income, and was she had every right to manage it through any account she chose. And practically invisible, because Daniel had not been closely attentive to the details of her financial life since the early years of the marriage. She had not, in those early years, minded his inattention. She had interpreted it as a sign of trust, or perhaps of confidence in her competence. She understood now that it was neither. It was the inattention of someone who does not consider the relevant information worth tracking. The difference sounds subtle. It is not. In April, she had lunch with a colleague from work, a woman named Priya who was 2 years older and considerably more socially experienced, who had the kind of clear-eyed pragmatism about relationships that comes from having had 2 of them not work out in instructive ways. Priya had never liked Daniel, had not said so explicitly because she was tactful, but had expressed it over the years in the specific modality of slightly too much enthusiasm whenever Mara mentioned anything she had done independently of him. Mara had noticed this and had never remarked on it, partly because she hadn't wanted to have the conversation, and partly because she had suspected, in the way you suspect things you don't want to know, that Priya's instinct was correct. Over lunch, Priya said, "You seem different." Mara said, "How so?" Priya considered. She searched for the word, less bent toward him, like when you talk about your weekend, you don't automatically include him in the frame. She paused. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Mara said. I've just been focused on my own work lately. This was accurate. It was also the most she was going to say. Priya nodded, the nod of a person who suspects more but respects the boundary. Well, the work is clearly going well. That ARET analysis got around? I heard Henderson mention it in a senior meeting. Mara sipped her water. I've been putting in extra time. It shows. Priya put down her fork. "For what it's worth. The change I'm noticing. I think it suits you." Mara looked at her. She thought about saying something more honest than what she had been offering. She thought about the specific weight of carrying a project like this alone, the way it occupied a portion of her attention at all times that was not available for any other purpose. She thought about how long it had been since she had said anything fully true to another person. "Thank you," she said. "That means something." The conversation that Mara had been waiting for happened on a Tuesday evening in early June, in the kitchen of their apartment, while she was making pasta, something she did not particularly feel like eating, but had chosen for the specific quality of requiring sustained attention that makes certain kinds of conversation more natural. Way because you can look at the pan while you're talking, and the action gives both parties something to organize themselves around. Daniel came home later than usual. He had been coming home later than usual for 3 weeks. She had noted this, dated and contextual, in the encrypted application on her phone. She had made no comment. He poured himself a drink. Scotch, which he saved for evenings when something was either going very well or needed to be processed, and stood at the kitchen island and watched her stir the sauce with the look of someone who has decided that the time for a conversation is now, but who hasn't yet selected the register. "I've been thinking," he said. She stirred the sauce. She added a pinch of salt without tasting it first, which was actually slightly too much salt, which she registered and decided was acceptable. About what? About us. She set down the spoon and turned the heat to low. She turned and looked at him with the direct, empty attention she had been cultivating, not cold in the theatrical sense, not visibly closed off, just genuinely absent the particular quality of warmth that used to be automatic. She had been removing it so gradually, over so many months, that he could not point to the moment it changed. That was the design. "What about us?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, in the way people do when they are about to say something that feels risky, and they are trying to read the room for safety. The room was not, she knew, particularly safe, but he couldn't see that. "I don't think we're happy," he said. She said nothing. "I think we've been going through motions for a while," he said. "And I think we probably both know that." "What are you saying, Daniel?" He put down his drink. "I think maybe we should talk about whether this is still the right arrangement for us." There it was. Not direct. He would never be direct. It was not his mode. But the shape of what he was saying was unmistakable. And she received it with the particular quality of stillness that is its own kind of eloquence. The stillness of someone who has been waiting for exactly this word and knows what comes next. "Okay," she said, I think that's a conversation worth having." His expression shifted. He had expected something else, more resistance or more grief, or the particular complex of emotion that their previous conversations on difficult topics had produced. What he got was her practical attention. She could see the adjustment happening in real time, the recalibration. "You're not surprised," he said. "I'm not," she said. She turned the pasta back up to medium and picked up the spoon. "I think you should reach out to your attorney this week." "I'll reach out to mine." "You have an attorney?" "I do," she said. A pause. "Since when?" "Since I started thinking ahead," she said. She served the pasta. She set a bowl in front of him. She sat across from him and picked up her fork and ate with the appetite of a person who had not been worried about this moment for a very long time, because she had already lived through the version of it that she was not going to allow to happen again. The pasta had too much salt. She didn't mind. Here is what happened, in sequence, in the 4 months following that kitchen conversation, compressed for clarity, because the emotional texture of it was less interesting than the mechanics. The attorneys made contact. Daniel's attorney, the same one who had prepared the original loan agreement, the one with the sub-clause, prepared a preliminary statement of marital assets that was, as Mara had anticipated, incomplete. It included the primary investment accounts, the apartment lease, the jointly owned vehicles, and a selection of the financial holdings that could not be omitted without triggering obvious suspicion. It did not include the 3 entities she had found, or the capital they represented, or the Meridian structure. This was precisely what she needed. Her attorney, not Caroline, who was the estate planning specialist, but a divorce attorney named Marcus Osei, who had been referred by Caroline and who had the particular quality of sounding relaxed while being in fact exceedingly precise, submitted a response that included a formal request for disclosure of all business interests, whether wholly or partially owned, whether held directly or through intermediary entities in any jurisdiction. The request cited specific disclosure requirements under New York domestic relations law and included a forensic accounting protocol that Grace Tan's firm had prepared, which specified exactly which transaction categories and entity structures were subject to disclosure. The request was, on its surface, standard. It is standard in high-asset divorces to request full disclosure. What was not standard was the specificity, the particular categories called out, the particular jurisdictions mentioned, the particular language around foreign intermediary structures. Daniel's attorney called Marcus on a Thursday morning. Marcus called Mara on Thursday afternoon. "He wants to know," Marcus said, "how you know about Meridian." Mara said, "Tell him that my forensic accounting team has been thorough. He's going to want a meeting." "That's fine. I'll be there." The meeting happened in Marcus's conference room, or one of those high-floor rooms with a view that both parties pretend not to notice, because noticing it would require acknowledging that the setting is designed to make someone feel small, and neither party wants to be that person. Daniel came with his attorney and a second person she didn't recognize, who turned out to be a financial advisor in the specific sense of someone brought to meetings like this to provide numerical backup and to signal that the other side is resourced. Mara came with Marcus and Grace Tan. Daniel looked at Grace with the specific expression of a person who has just understood something they did not want to understand. He said nothing. Grace set a document on the table. It was 32 pages. The first page was a cover sheet. The second page was an executive summary. The summary was 14 lines. Every line cited either a specific document, a specific transaction, or a specific entity. The structure of Meridian was outlined on pages 8 through 19, including the foreign intermediary, including the capital flow analysis, including the timeline of deposits that corresponded, with a precision that could not be accidental, to periods following significant marital asset events, bonuses, an inheritance receipt, a property sale. Daniel's attorney was quiet for a long time. The financial advisor he had brought was also quiet. Daniel himself was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has just discovered that the room they are in has fewer exits than they thought. Mara did not look at him with satisfaction. She did not look at him with anything specifically aimed. She looked at the document in front of her. She had her own copy, well thumbed. She had read it 4 times. And she said to Marcus rather than to Daniel, "I think the equitable distribution discussion should start from the full picture." Daniel's attorney said, "We'll need time to review this." "Of course," Marcus said. "We've allocated 2 weeks, after which we'd like to reconvene with full disclosure on the undisclosed entities." He paused with precise, performative patience. All of them. The settlement that eventually emerged from the process was not a number Mara would have imagined in her previous life. Because in her previous life, she had not known the numbers existed. The equitable distribution framework, applied to the full economic picture that Grace's analysis had produced, yielded a figure that accounted for the marital contribution to asset growth across all entities, including Meridian, which turned out to be capitalized at a level that even Mara's careful research had slightly underestimated. The foreign intermediary had been partially unwound before the meeting, a move that Mara's team had anticipated and that Grace's analysis had already adjusted for using the transaction timing data. There was also the matter of the grandfather's property. Mara had, on Caroline's advice, registered her grandfather's parcel in Westchester under a family LLC she had established 6 months into this second iteration of her life, which placed it unambiguously outside the marital estate and beyond the reach of any subsequent collateral claim. She had done this with appropriate documentation, appropriate timing, appropriate transparency. She had disclosed the LLC registration at tax time as required, and it had registered to Daniel as a routine organizational decision rather than a protective maneuver, because the timing and the framing had been designed to produce exactly that reading. The property stayed hers. It was not in dispute. It was not even discussed at the settlement table because there was nothing to discuss. It was a clean fact. The settlement took 6 months to negotiate fully. During those 6 months, Mara continued to go to work, continued to produce good analysis, received a promotion in September that she had been tracking toward for 18 months, and that her managing director announced with the particular enthusiasm of someone who feels they are recognizing something they spotted early. She celebrated with Priya at a wine bar on the east side, the kind of place with good glasses and low lighting, and a list that rewards people who know what they're looking for. Priya said, "To you." Mara said, "To good work." They drank. Priya looked at her over the glass with the expression she had always had when she suspected that what she was seeing was the surface of something more complex. "How are you really?" "I'm fine," Mara said. "I'm actually fine. The divorce is proceeding on schedule." Mara paused. His attorney called Marcus yesterday to accept the framework. There are a few numbers left to settle. It should be done by the end of the year. Priya was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't know what hit him." Mara considered whether to say anything more specific. She decided against it, not from secrecy, but from a sense that the actual details would be less interesting to Priya than the impression Priya already had, which was accurate enough. "He made a series of decisions," she said. "You know, that he expected to work out a certain way. They didn't. Because of you. Because of better information." Priya refilled their glasses. The bar had the sound that wine bars have in the early evening, a low, layered hum of other people's conversations, not intrusive, but present, like white noise that has been given a social texture. Mara looked at the glass in front of her and thought briefly about the birthday dinner, not with the cold sadness of the first time or the purposeful chill of the second, but with the particular quality of distance that comes when something that was once close and consequential has been fully worked through. Not resolved in the soft sense, completed. The Chambol Musigny was different from the Burgundy she had ordered at Vaucluse 18 months ago. Older vintage, more restrained. So with that specific quality that good Burgundy develops with age, the sense that what was once vivid has become layered and complex and requires attention to appreciate. She appreciated it. There was one more thing. It happened in November, after the settlement framework was accepted and before the final documentation was signed. She had taken a Friday afternoon off work, something she almost never did, which made it feel like an occasion, and driven up to Westchester to walk the property. It was the first time she had been there since before her previous life ended. The parcel was 12 acres, mostly wooded, with a clearing on the western edge where her grandfather had kept a kitchen garden in his later years. The garden was overgrown now, had been for years, but the structure of it was still legible. The raised beds, the stone border, the rusted iron gate at the entrance that her grandfather had found at an antique sale in Connecticut and installed himself. So, with some difficulty, one summer when she was 7, she remembered watching him work, remembered his hands on the iron, remembered the particular quality of focus he brought to physical tasks that was different from the focus he brought to other things, clean and unworried. The focus of someone doing something they know how to do. She pushed the gate open. It was still heavy, still slightly misaligned, still produced the same low protest of metal on stone. She stood in the overgrown garden and looked at the beds and felt the particular quality of a thing that is still yours after considerable effort to keep it that way. The afternoon was cold and very clear, with the quality of November light that makes everything look precise and slightly remote, as if the day is being viewed through a pane of very clean glass. She stayed for an hour, walking the perimeter of the property along a path her grandfather had worn into the ground over decades of his own walking, which was still slightly visible beneath the autumn leaves. She thought about him, her grandfather, who had been a quiet and observant man, with a talent for patience and an instinct for the difference between what could be fixed and what needed to be let go. She had not understood, for most of her first life, that these were related capacities, that being good at letting go was not the opposite of being good at holding on, but was in fact a prerequisite. You could only hold the right things if you were willing to release the others. He had known this. It had taken her considerably longer to learn. She walked back to her car. The sun was getting low, the long horizontal light of late afternoon that turns the leaf litter amber and makes even overgrown gardens look considered. She took out her phone and looked at it for a moment. There were no messages she needed to answer, no calls she needed to return. She put it back in her pocket. She had an appointment Monday with her cardiologist. She had made the appointment 6 months ago, the week after her second birthday, because she had known about the blood clot and had decided, with the same pragmatic attention she brought to everything else, that knowing something was preventable was not the same as preventing it. The cardiologist had run tests in that first appointment, had prescribed a medication, had scheduled a follow-up for 6 months out, and then another one after that. The protocol was standard for the condition that the tests had identified, a condition she had not known about in her first life because she had not been looking for it, because no one looks for things that haven't yet announced themselves. She was looking now. She started the car and pulled out of the gravel turnout where she'd parked onto the county road into the long amber afternoon. The drive back to the city took 40 minutes on a Friday evening with light traffic, which was unusual and felt like a small gift. She had music on, something spare and unhurried, a pianist she had discovered in the last year and found suited to driving, to the particular quality of being in motion without urgency. The blood clot was not going to happen in March. She was going to be around to see the settlement finalized. She was going to see the spring and the Westchester garden when she got around to clearing the raised beds and starting it back up, and the view from her new apartment. She had already found it, signed the lease, done this quietly and with appropriate legal timing, which was smaller than the Upper East Side place but entirely her own and faced east, and caught the morning light in a way she had liked immediately when she walked in. She had one more thing to do before the year ended. She had been saving it, not dramatically, not as a ritual, but because the timing seemed right. She had a reservation at Vaucluse for December 3rd. A table, for one. The white truffle risotto was seasonal and would still be on the menu. She had ordered the Chambol Musigny in advance, a specific bottle from a producer she had researched, and looked forward to tasting in that specific context, at that specific table, in that specific dress. The gold dress had been cleaned and pressed and was hanging in the closet of the new apartment ready. She merged onto the highway. The city came into view ahead, its particular arrangement of lights against the darkening sky, familiar and clean and full of the specific kind of possibility that cities produce for people who know how to be in them on their own terms. She did not think about Daniel. She had not thought about him in the raw and consuming way that thinking about someone means. It was for several months. This was not suppression. This was the natural result of the project being complete. Not forgotten, not forgiven in the soft, therapeutic sense, but fully documented, fully prosecuted, and fully concluded. He was a chapter in a book she had closed. The book itself was not what mattered. What mattered was the next thing she was going to build. She pressed the accelerator slightly, not impatiently but with intention, and the city got closer and the music played. And the evening settled around her like a thing she had chosen. The settlement was signed on December 18th. She had not been in the room. Her attorney handled the final execution because she had decided on reflection that being in the room served no purpose except to give the event a weight it no longer deserved. She was at her desk at work when Marcus called at 2:14 in the afternoon and said in the tone of someone delivering expected good news, "It's done." "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "For everything." She hung up. She looked at her computer screen, where a market analysis was open that she had been working on before the call. She picked up where she had left off. At 4:30, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, which she looked at once and then set aside because she recognized the number from a previous life and had nothing to say to it. At 5:15, she packed up her things. At 5:30, she was in a taxi, on her way uptown, and watching the December streets through the window. The restaurant was warm when she walked in, with the particular warmth that good restaurants have in winter. Not just temperature, but the quality of a place that is doing its job, feeding people, creating the conditions for a good evening. The hostess, Isabel, the name tag said again or still, led her to a table by the window. She ordered the risotto, she ordered the wine. She looked out at the city, which was doing what it always did on December evenings, producing that specific combination of cold air and warm light, the illuminated windows and moving traffic, and the particular energy of a place that does not stop for anything. She had always loved this city. She loved it more in this moment than she had in some time, for reasons she did not feel the need to examine. The risotto arrived. She picked up her fork. Her phone buzzed once on the table. She turned it face down without looking at it. She ate.